We're at, what's it, about 5:03?
Yep, it is
5:02?
5:02 on my.
Yeah. Jump right into the agenda. Discussion of possible action on the minutes from October 12th. Paul, do you have anything to say?
Nope, they look good to me, Jim. I would move to approve.
And I'll second that. All in favor? Aye.
Hi, I'm here, you guys. I just can't seem to start my video.
Yay. All right.
There she is.
I'll work on it.
Well, your face comes up when you talk.
That's one thing.
Your picture, anyway. Okay. The next item is the Public Works Facility Needs Assessment, final report.
Yeah, so we have Chris and Corey again are joining us from Cedar Corp. They gave kind of the preliminary up-to-date report at the last month's meeting, and they finalized some of their cost estimates, building dimensions, so on and so forth. So I wanted to invite them back and give the Public Works Committee the final report. This report will be filed and more than likely will be presented to council at some point in time. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris and Corey, and guys, you'll just have to let us know if you need to share a screen to do any type of PowerPoint presentation or anything.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think for the most part, we can kind of go through some of the information without too much PowerPoint. We may bring up the site plan and the cost estimate up here a little bit later. But just to kind of recap from our last presentation last month, basically we kind of talked broadly about the existing facilities and sites. Looking at the Second Street Public Works shop, there is no space. There's no more site to expand to. We got about 2.3 acres there, and it's difficult to make the turning movements as it is, let alone trying to expand the facility at all. Excuse me. And then on the 1425 Second Street, the storage buildings, that sits on about an acre. So that's limited space as well. And the buildings are getting very aged on that site. So with a constricted site and the age of the building, we just didn't see that as a feasible option going forward for the city. And then on 2001 Ward Road, there's a very recent building there that's in good condition, and it currently is providing space for the Parks Department, and appears to provide adequate space for it, and should provide adequate space for the Parks Department going forward as well. And the proximity of that site is very centralized in the city and provides the Parks Department quick access to all the parks throughout the city that it services. And then there was a site out on Cradley Lane in North Hudson. So that's actually outside of the city limits. It's an existing fill site. So there was just logistic and just the nature of the site didn't really provide us a real comfort to recommend that site for any public works use other than its current use of the fill site. And then we have the proposed site on Hanley Road within the industrial park. This site has 7.25 acres, has easy access to the entire city's infrastructure, quick access to several highways and everything. So it's positioned very well within the city to provide the public works what they need to service the city. And it provides, you know, enough space for a new public works facility, and along with the different train movements. So with that, you know, that's kind of the overview of your existing facilities and sites. I don't know if anybody has any questions at this point. Okay, nothing so far. So I'll kind of roll into the building spaces and what we kind of calculated for square footage. You know, for office space, we looked at 5,100 square feet. That includes 7 staff offices, along with 1 DPW office, reception, lobby, work area, conference room, you know, the miscellaneous storage and restrooms that are required, along with staff support areas being break room for all the staff, locker room for all the staff that's going out in the trucks and everything, along with showers there. That way, when they get done, they don't have to take all the contaminants that they're dealing with, you know, throughout their work shift. Don't take those home and everything, as well as an open workstation area so they can kind of put down, you know, fill in their timesheets and you know, do little trainings that they need to, without having a full dedicated office space for each individual. And then in the truck garage, we had about 39,000 square feet. That included space for 16 pickup stalls, about 25 equipment stalls, loading dock for large equipment or large deliveries of parts and different things like that. This little safety feature for the staff, along with some trailer storage and restrooms throughout the garage space, so easy access for staff to get to restrooms and everything. Then kind of going into the workshop spaces, we had about 17,500 square feet. We had within that square footage, we had 2 large equipment maintenance bays with their heavy lifts and everything to work on the plows and everything, along with 1 pickup maintenance bay to do regular maintenance on the pickup and pickups in the fleet, and along with you know, the ability to service the rest of the city's fleet as well in other departments. And then also along with that space, you got a parts room, you know, for storage of the parts that they need to have on hand to make all the maintenance work. An office space for the maintenance staff, so they can kind of order parts and things like that, and kind of be separated from the regular office space, so they have quick access to their office space. You know, as well as restroom for them. Along with the maintenance bays, we'd have a sign shop for excuse me, sign shop for maintaining and creating new traffic signs, working on traffic lights and different things like that. And a general workshop as well for any fabrication that the staff needs to do, different repairs on their trailers and different stuff like that. As well as a wash bay for their equipment with the salt and everything. We want to get that cleaned off pretty regularly, so have a dedicated wash bay so they can do that throughout the season. So with all that space, the total building square footage, we're looking at about 61,600 square feet for that space. In addition to that, we also have a salt storage structure that we have estimated out to be about 11,000 square feet, providing the Public Works Department with the ability to store up to 4,000 ton of salt that will make it so they can get those large quantities, order those large quantities in which they need in the future here, presently and into the future, and have the place to store it, adequately. Along with that, we also have the brine maker included in that space, so they can make the brine and fill their trucks from there. Excuse me. So to put in perspective for you guys, so we just did an addition to the Menominee Public Works Department facility, and kind of looking at the city of Hudson estimated around 14,000 population currently, I believe, with a square footage of 61,600 to serve that population. And Menominee has about 16,540 plus or minus. And with this, a new addition and their existing facility, they've got about 62,265 square feet. So we're right in range. Obviously some of the equipment that Menominee has and needs is the same that you guys have and need. And so the percentages wise, you're within kind of the norm of what some recent ones have been being constructed as. Excuse me.
We were constructing an entirely new facility for Menominee, just to kind of put it in comparison. Their square footage probably would have been 75,000 square feet, just that they are a little bit larger. They do have other outbuildings that they're still maintaining, but what we did is we put basically a vehicle addition, so the truck storage, wash bay, and another drive-through storage bay. But all the remaining components of their maintenance stayed where they're at. And then we just kind of reshuffled offices, and some of their public works staff are still at City Hall. So that was a phase project. This is phase one for the vehicle storage. So I expect when we're all done with the city of Menominee, it'll be very comparable to what Chris has presented here in the study. With this, we do still have the existing parks building, and part of that is one, for space, two, for convenience and access throughout the community. So this puts the city of Hudson on a track for increased growth that is going to continue to occur in the coming years. You're poised for rapid growth, and I expect that to continue, and I expect that probably the boundary of the city will expand as well. So
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in here real quick, Chris, before you go on. So, I mean, that's the one thing, you know, I know the council just went through approving and building the new fire station, and, you know, they're kind of set on their territory, right? If we annex in another 200 acres over the next, you know, 3, 5, 4, you know, 3, 5, 7 years, it's really not going to change their territory. Their territory is set where if we annex in that much territory over the next 5, 7 years, I mean, that's drastically going to increase our workload, you know, road miles, so on and so forth. So it's going to be a fine balance between what our current needs are, what our future needs are, because, you know, this is a once in a generation type building. And, you know, I don't want to put the city in a position where 20, 30 years down the road, you know, halfway through the building life cycle, we're having to add on and double the space. So, I mean, obviously, you know, these are going to be conversations as this becomes more serious and more realistic in the upcoming years, as far as what we want now that serves our needs and what we need into the future, and not try to overstep our bounds, but keep it realistic, right? So I just wanted to say that. So,
To that effect too, Mike, I think it's important to point out, I'm sure that the committee realizes it with all the equipment and everything you're having to purchase, but you're having to do increased maintenance on your roadways and infrastructure, just because there is, there's more environmental requirements and impacts that we're having in all of our communities, especially Hudson, that your proximity to the river. You know, secondly, just for example, street lights, street signs are much more sophisticated. So we're required to have more equipment, more materials, more product, and the ability to respond and restore those services when they go out, because the public, well, maybe, you know, 30, 40 years ago, they would live with a light being out. Somebody's phone's going to be ringing until that street light is repaired, or that street sign is repaired. So things like road patchers, back trucks, things that we didn't have the size and sheer number of pieces of equipment 30 years ago has gone up dramatically, and continually will. I mean, you know, if you drive the interstate, often you'll see these trailer plows. Well, that's something that's come about and has changed what street shops and highway shops look like now too. So a lot of impacts there.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can all kind of see my screen, my screen that I shared.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So overall, this really hasn't changed too much from what we kind of presented to you at last month's meeting. But just kind of to give you an idea, you know, so here's that, you know, the office and staff support areas, that 5,100 square feet that goes to all the offices and staff support spaces. And then for the truck garage, we have you know, this large truck garage here that allows the traffic to flow through, and we find that you know, with having it so they back into the stall and drive straight out and then straight through, excuse me, provides a little bit safer work environment for everybody, a little bit better traffic control for everybody as well. So that's part of it. And then also part of the garage space, we've got this trailer storage, and it provides enough space for you know, 4 to 5 truck and trailer, you know, larger trucks and equipment trailers to be stored in here, making it quick and easy access. They can drive in, back up to the trailer, drive straight out, and get out on the road. And then as well, in this truck garage area, we got this loading dock that provides them a little bit a safer way of getting materials off of delivery semis and everything. And then our 17,500 square feet of workshop area includes the parts storage and inventory, our 3 maintenance bays, the 2 large equipment, as well as a pickup bay, and the office and restroom off of there. And then we have our general workshop for, just working on general maintenance of trailers and and different equipment. And then a large storage area for different sign equipment, different sign parts and pieces that can be controlled a little bit better with all the electronics that are involved with that. And then the sign maintenance shop that'll allow them to pull a truck and trailer with a signal light if they had to, or a light pole if they had to. They could bring that in, get out of the elements and work on that. And then our wash bay to maintain the plow trucks and everything, and get that salt and dirt and just highway dust off of there. And then here kind of shows the different features of the site, as well as kind of the flow and function of the site as well. When we laid this out, we kind of figured, one access for the large equipment going out on the street. Excuse me. That would be coming through off of O'Neill Road, just being that Hanley Road's a little bit busier road. Just give them easier access in and out of O'Neill here. And then figuring the trucks would be traveling past the salt storage and into the building to the truck garage, as I showed you before, and then they could back into their stalls. And then as they're going out, they would come out this north end and loop around and back out onto O'Neill. That provides a nice traffic flow. It also provides the opportunity, if they needed to pick up anything off of these stockpiles. We'll have some bins for different materials, as well as loading up their plow trucks from the salt storage building or the brine maker. And then, figuring lighter traffic coming in off of Hanley, so that when the staff comes into work, parking out here and directly access into the break room and locker rooms before they go out to their patrol vehicles. And then the different workshops being accessed off of this southeast side here. We also have a fuel station here. This location is adjustable, but figuring that they can pull up to it, and then loop back around and go out off of O'Neill there. Obviously this is very conceptual, but gives you an idea of what we're kind of looking at when we're looking at this site. So then with that all being said, we kind of go into the costs of the entire project and the construction costs and whatnot. So basically with the site development and the building spaces, we base these off of a kind of a high level unit cost per square foot. It's we use this from previous projects and what the current market conditions are kind of telling us. So with all the site development, building, and salt shed components of that, we're looking at a construction cost of about $8.9 million. And then, excuse me. And then we always like to, especially at this stage, we like to provide a 10% contingency just to You know, because as we go through our design, everything's going to kind of change. Things are going to, you know, ebb and flow, and we'll end up, you know, being right around that 7.5 to 5% by the time you decide to go out for construction. So with that and the AE fees and the permits and regulatory fees and other fees associated with the project, that totals up to be about 2.3 million. And then we always go through, you know, with facility furnishings and facility furnishings allowance, we always put in, you know, the phone and data systems, you know, the servers and your connection to the fiber or whatever is out there for phone and data service. You know, in a facility like this, we're going to want to have a security system, and then, you know, there's going to be some shop equipment that you guys don't have currently, that with this space you'll want to be able to use. So we put in a small allowance for that. And then the equipment for the wash bay itself, you know, we provide the space, and then we got to get the equipment in there to be able to really wash down the vehicles, you know, and that's going to include catwalks and pumps and sprayers and different underbody washes and different things like that. And then figuring, you know, you got a little bit more space for maintenance. You might have a couple vehicles on lifts. So looking at some additional lift equipment to be able to work on multiple vehicles at a time. As well as, you know, the FF&E, the fixture furnishings and equipment. So that's kind of your office equipment and excuse me, and you know, miscellaneous equipment that you'll need once you get into the space and start using it. And then also I included, since that the Hanley Road site is not owned by the city currently, we included the property acquisition cost for that. Talking with the business development group, it was about $1.50 a square foot, bringing us with a 7.35 acre site, bringing us to about 480,250. So with your construction costs and all the fees and different allowances, you know, you're looking at a total project cost of about 12 million. I know that seems like a pretty large number, but if you look at it over, you know, a 50-year plus building, you know, it's going to be something that's going to take the city of Hudson into the future for their public works services. So, any questions or concerns on the costs?
So you mentioned 50-year plus buildings. That's the construction design. The building is functional, well, I guess functional changes, but is going to last 50 years.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, we typically look at, you know, you're probably going to be looking, you know, 30 between, you know, 30 to 50 years. You're probably going to be looking at, you know, some sort of change in the function, which may require, you know, a small remodel or just adjusting the space to function, you know, if there's new equipment or something to that effect.
Is that 10 to 15 years will see some level of maintenance and replacements. So it might be some finishes, it may be some minor HVAC components or lighting, and it's just part of planned obsolescence of equipment and materials. Usually in that 30-year mark, then you do, as Chris had mentioned, see some level of renovation. This structure that we would propose in itself is easily a 50 to 75 year building. Now, the big question for the city of Hudson is how fast are you going to continue to grow, and what direction you grow. A change in growth patterns could impact the city significantly. So, and then you also look at, who's doing the maintenance, and, we don't know how that's going to look in 30 years perhaps, but that's what this facility is designed for, is that 30, 50-year benchmark. The one thing that you have with your facility is looking at an expanded maintenance operations. So being able to perform vehicle maintenance, I think, could be a big benefit to the city. And that may also help offset some of the costs, because depending where the city's budget is, some of those costs could be shared with other departments. Possibly. I mean, there's an opportunity there, I guess. Let's maybe put it that way. So something else to consider.
Yeah, that's a good point. When the city continues to grow, I mean, what are the logical boundaries going to expand? We can't go west because of the river. We really can't go north because of North Hudson. So the only logical way is basically south and east. And this site is going, if we continue south, this site becomes more and more centralized. And if we go east, I mean, if we go out towards, the travel center exit, I'll say, it's closer to that than it is to Lake Malibu. So, I mean, it's a prime spot. So Chris and Corey, question for you guys. You didn't happen to look at, the existing facilities where the public works garages are now, what type of value those sites have and how it factors into the overall cost of this building, did you?
No, that wasn't evaluated. That's always it's a bit challenging to quantify, because property's worth as much as what you can sell it for. That's usually a separate study or evaluation. There's different approaches to that. You can sell as is, you can remediate, or the other thing that's becoming more and more popular is partnerships, public-private partnerships, or communities that are going out for proposal and saying, let's say the Second Street site, you wanted to have a housing development there. You could go out for RFP and get a housing developer, and that's what the use is for. And the city would then enter into agreement with that developer. So there's a few different approaches that can be taken with those existing parcels. Definitely will offset. The other part of it too is we're putting property, we're going to take 7 acres off the tax roll, but we are putting property in potentially high value areas back on the tax roll.
So Mike, what are you primarily looking for tonight?
I guess I'm just looking for any initial feedback from this committee before we bring it to council. I mean, obviously it's a lot to take in. The numbers are staggering compared to, the fire station, for example, which we just bonded and paid for, which was around, I think it was around 7 million, correct?
6 million total, yeah.
Yeah, 6 million. So, I mean, you're almost double here. I mean, if the committee isn't comfortable with this number and doesn't think it's realistic, I mean, then you're charging myself and Cedar Corp to kind of sharpen the pencil and try to get it closer to 10 million, which means, maybe reducing the bill. I don't want to bring it to council and then have it go nowhere and just say, well, that was good. I want this to be realistic. I want us to be able to move forward with this project. If it takes us several years, and so be it, but I want us to start working towards it, whether it's acquiring the land in a couple of years. But I want everybody to be on board and see that there is a need there for this. So I guess, I'm just looking for that initial feedback. Do you think we need to make some minor tweaks? I know Chris mentioned the salt shed, there's 4,000 ton capacity there. That's maybe an area where we can maybe reduce it back down to 2,000, considering, our average allotment for a year is around 1,800 tons. So we can maybe make some of those changes to try and reduce some of the costs to get it to be more palatable when we do present to council.
So Mike, my thoughts, just looking it over. One, I think the location is excellent. Two, I think we definitely have the need to start working toward a centralized system. I think that is a total validation with the current buildings just being so old and inadequate for what we're doing. Three, my thought is that with the $12 million price tag, I think is steep. So my question is to think about the existing facility that's near the fire station. I'm sorry, the address is escaping me right now, but I think Cedar Corps, if I'm right, you guys said that that's actually a pretty good facility, or that's working okay right now when we met with you guys last month. So I guess my thought is that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that is correct.
Okay, so my thought is, why don't we take the one that's still working and we could use that to store certain equipment while we acquired the land and started to build the main the office structure, the workspaces and so on. What I'm trying to suggest is maybe could it be a phased approach where we may as well we could use the one that's still good, right? Is what I'm thinking, but we could start also on this, and over time, maybe the whole vehicle storage garage, I'm not sure the exact title for that, which is a really big portion of this new plan. Maybe that's something we phase in over time or something like that. So I guess I would suggest maybe looking at, could we do this in phases? Like the land would be one, right? Mm-hmm. And then starting to get the main kind of hub going, but while we use the other structure, if that makes sense, that's still working. So I'm kind of looking at maybe if it was in phases or steps, it might be easier financially to do for the city, and the council might be more open to it. So that's just a thought that's coming to me.
Yeah, Paul, that's an interesting idea. Like perhaps throwing it out, close the 1 acre site and sell that off, and move whatever we're doing there, move it to one of those 2 buildings that we have up on Ward Avenue. Because I kind of have a feeling that space has been taken there, but officially, I don't believe we've agreed on what should be in there. I know you guys are working out how to use that space, but we need to look at that as a flex space, I guess, to flex over this time while we start on this process. The other question I have is, how much does this increase our capacity or capability, Mike, in terms of equipment and human resources? What would we be able to handle? Are we doubling our capability? I mean, that's a little bit hard to figure out because you're actually adding some things in there, some increased maintenance ability, that sort of thing. Yep. How can we look at cost savings, effectiveness of operations? That's, I mean, there is a lot. I'm convinced there's a lot there in terms of saving travel time and being able to get right to work. Also, where are we for growth? How many more miles of road can we handle because of this space? We have to plan for that. We don't want to build a building that's 10% bigger than what we have now. So that's certainly not in our plans to grow 10%.
Well, I mean, what we can do is, obviously we're kind of going through a comp plan right now, and maybe based upon the final draft of that, will kind of give us some direction on where the community would like to go over the next 10 years. If they want to see some slowdown in the growth, maybe we might not have to go as big, that type of thing. Maybe rely on the comp plan to kind of steer our decisions that way. And then as far as the maintenance is concerned, I can foresee the city, it'd be interesting to just kind of tally up all of the maintenance costs with the police department and the building and zoning department and the wastewater treatment plant and the, because they're all outsourcing most of their, maintenance. If we were to just bring that in-house, what kind of cost savings would we see that could offset on a yearly basis and not have to, but that type of stuff would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that would be excellent. How do we do something like that? Do we have the resources to do that, or do we need?
I think we could do that in-house. I mean, I can go around to the department heads and ask kind of a yearly maintenance budget that they have, and then what that would look like if we did it in-house, right? And if we paid an employee part-time or full-time, if we bring another full-time mechanic on, I mean, there's got to be some cost savings there, I would imagine, just in regular brake jobs and tires and, oil changes, so on and so forth. You're not having to pay that overhead of the shop fee.
Well, just a little bit of just having to run the equipment and the logistics of working through an outside vendor versus working internally. One thing you made mention of, or somebody made mention of, increased time just due to proximity in the community. If we just figured 20 employees, just figure, if it's backing equipment in and out, maneuvering equipment and traveling through the city, if that was an hour per employee, which isn't much, assuming that if they go out, they come back, at noon, or for lunch, they leave and they come back at the end of the day, that equipment's coming and going quite regularly. If you just put a rate of $50 an hour for 20 employees, that's $250,000 a year just in itself. So it adds up pretty quickly.
Yeah, and just the way that the current facility is set up. I mean, you have multiple man hours, just rotating vehicles out and taking it over to the other Second Street site, and different stuff like that, and with having a centralized location where all the equipment is stored and you can just get to a vehicle and get out of the garage without having to move multiple vehicles and making multiple maneuvers and things like that, is going to save them a huge amount of time.
So Chris and Corey, have you seen in other communities a phased approach like Paul was talking about, or is it kind of an all or nothing deal? What have you seen and kind of your thoughts on that suggestion?
Glad you brought that up. So in Menominee, we are doing a phased approach. Their existing, but it's an addition on their existing facility. We are going to, so currently we're using the Ward Avenue site, but we're going to continue to use that. So there may be some overflow, and we can use that for some surging and maneuvering. But if we were to move out to the new site here, I don't know how we would phase it. I'd have to give some consideration. We may be able to pull back on some of the shop space, or what I have seen is where a community will build up more of a cold storage building, more of a pre-engineered building, and then rein in some of the heated storage. Now you're putting an extra building on the site, and we'd have to see how that fits on your site and what that would do to the long range plans. I think if we looked at a 10-year net, I think it would end up costing the city more to phase it in that approach. But there may be some other solutions that we haven't thought of yet.
Well, just to make a couple comments, I'm involved in a construction project at a condominium, and the phased approach, at least in my experience, actually increases costs over the long run. It's much more efficient to do things at once and do it right. But I'd really like to have you, Mike, look at those efficiencies and the costs. I think that's going to be really, really important in selling this, or getting approval. And I think that even the $250,000 that was that Chris just calculated, I think that's really low. I think those efficiencies are big, big, big. There's a lot of potential for great improvement. So I think putting numbers on those, putting good solid numbers on the efficiencies with the rationale that you used to come up with it is one thing I'd like to maybe ask for. And then I think it's super important to get some valuations on our current properties that will, I mean, those are potentially pretty awesome, sweet properties that we're going to be selling. And I'd really like to know how much, even if we're not going to be selling them for quite a while, I'd like to know today's value.
Okay. All right.
So this sounds like a staff project for your staff team to take a look at, do some brainstorming on how they would utilize this facility to reduce their costs, reduce the city's costs. So we definitely need to approach this as what's best for the city. And I don't think we'll have any, not in my backyard or not my trucks, but just in case.
Okay.
Mike, maybe we can help out a little bit with that and pull that into the study and tie that into the findings and recommendations, just so it makes the document more encompassing.
Yeah, I think the more of that's in there, that we've examined the value of this project. Now, there are some human elements to this too, in terms of safety. There's some environmental issues that we need to dollarize, that we're going to be avoiding some problems. I think we need to look at that as well. We talked about those in the first meeting, but all the issues we have with the facilities that we currently have, and they're not the greatest places to work. And so we're not building a Taj Mahal here. We're building a decent facility where people can work in relative comfort and safety and be more efficient. So there's a value to that.
Okay. All right. Well, I think if the committee doesn't have any further suggestions, I'm going to touch base with Cedar Corp sometime here before the end of the week, and we'll put together some of these, like I said, some numbers on some of the efficiencies that can be gained, and then I'll probably reach out to Mike Johnson about the valuation of the existing properties, and if we need to pull a realtor in just to get a ballpark number, we'll include that in the report as well. And then I'll probably reach out to Aaron and run this by him and kind of get his thoughts on how he'd like to proceed on presenting this to council in the future and when that would be a good time to do so. But thank you for the feedback. I really appreciate it. It helps out tremendously.
I would think early next year sometime would be appropriate, where we don't have any budget issues facing us or any other major things going on. It would be a good time.
Yeah, no, I agree.
One final thought, I think, can we do the land acquisition separately? Like, I think we should get going on the land acquisition first. Because if we could get that sooner rather than later, and then we can always figure out, the building design and costs and et cetera. So I just think the first step is we should be trying to secure that land.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, Paul. I think that's priority number one, whether it's probably not going to happen this next bond cycle and next couple of years, but I know Aaron did discuss, if there's an opportunity, we can take out another bond in 2022 based upon the economy and what it's doing, and maybe we would look to acquire that property. Like I said, that's step one, because if we lose that property, I'm going to be honest, there's not a whole lot left after that that's going to accommodate, the square footage that we need for our building, unless we find an existing building that, moves out and we can kind of retrofit it. And I mean, that's always a possibility too, but man, that's you're rolling the dice there.
You actually have a question about whether that property is taxable, is currently taxed. I kind of doubt that it is. That's a city entity of sorts that runs that. So it's kind of, we just need to examine that piece thoroughly. You're right, Paul. We need to get on that.
Hey, did I miss something?
Being in the business park, yeah.
Sorry. Did that document that you were looking at, sharing your screen, did that come out to us? I don't recall seeing that. The 32-page document?
No, I don't
we
think it did.
I wouldn't mind getting a copy of that. I might be able to, provide more comments if I had a chance to look at it.
Okay.
Okay. Got what you need, Mike?
Yep.
I want to thank the Cedar Corp. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with the staff and the city, so I'm glad to be part of the team.
Good. All right. Next comment, comments and suggestions from citizens present. Is there anybody who wants to comment? Okay, moving on. General business, discussion and possible action on improvements to Cratley Lane, Village of North Hudson.
Yeah, so this is a carryover from our previous meeting. The committee directed staff to come up with some numbers on some various treatment types. Dean was able to contact Monarch Paving, and they gave us some numbers based upon the square footage and so on and so forth. So a double seal, so it'd be a double chip seal. That approximate cost is $19,000, and this would be from basically where the asphalt currently ends, right near our storage, cold storage buildings, to the southern property line of the landfill there. So the double seal was about $19,000. Rolled millings, which is basically, street millings is when, a road is milled and then they have kind of these asphalt particles with some tar in it. Those can be relayed out and rolled, and you get kind of this compacted asphalt type roadway. That was $20,000. And then a brand new 2-inch asphalt lift would be approximately $40,000 to do. So that kind of gives the committee an idea of what the cost would be to do our portion of the road that we own. I have not reached out to Rod and Gun Club. I kind of wanted to get your feedback if you kind of have a general direction that you'd like to see moving forward, and then I would bring them on board and say, this is what we're doing. Do you want to be a part of it, so on and so forth. So I guess, from a maintenance and recommendation, I haven't done a double seal coat over a Crush Rock Road. It's usually done in townships. I haven't had any experience with that. I have had experience with rolled millings, and they tend to hold up. I think that would be my recommendation, is do the road millings at half the cost of a new lift. And then, in 2 to 3, maybe 4 or 5 years, we would come back and just do a seal coat over the road millings. I mean, that road would be good for a long time based upon the amount of traffic that it would see. So that's kind of my recommendation if we were to move forward on a more permanent solution there.
Yeah, if I could chime in too, Mike, for a second. There's a possibility we could get the millings for a cheaper rate too, based on if we were able to work with the contractor for the Highway 35 project. There's a possibility that we could get some from them. That would lower the cost down for that option. But had to be kind of conservative, assuming that we wouldn't be able to get those. So, yeah, like Mike said, based on the traffic that goes through there, rolled millings would probably be a good option for at least a few years. Then you have to kind of touch them up every so often. But, if you're talking about dozens to 100 or 200 vehicles per day using it, it should hold up pretty well for the foreseeable future. So.
Was this price all the way to the entrance of the Rod and Gun Club?
Yes.
And it's all city owned?
Yep.
Okay.
Once you get to that Rod and Gun Club entrance, then, the city doesn't own anything to the south of there.
So Mike, for tonight, what are you looking for tonight?
I mean, if the committee wants to move forward with a more, I mean, this would be included. Well, like Dean said, I would maybe want to take advantage of a project that we had going on in town to lower those costs, right? And maybe pair it.
Mhm.
As much as I don't want to try and push the project back 1 year, but it'd always be nice to tie it to a mill and overlay project that we have going on to, like I said, to, you know, maybe cut these expenses in half, and then it'd be even more palatable. I mean, I guess we probably don't need any action on it tonight, but I just want to have you give your feedback on, you know, the numbers, and, you know, we could include it in the 2020 street maintenance project if we want to, when we start discussing that. I mean, that'll be coming up here probably in January. We'll bring forward the plan for the committee to review and approve. We could, you know, possibly include that as part of that maintenance project that we do every year. So.
Okay. Well, I think you answered my questions, which were how long would the road millings last? And it sounds like that's you feel good about that, and Dean feels good about that. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that seems like, yeah, I think that would be the thing to move toward. I mean, I don't think we need to make a motion or whatnot, but maybe just have an understanding that we would like to move forward with this and tie it in conjunction with a future project to cut costs down. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would support that. I don't know where Jim and Sarah, what your thoughts are.
Well, my thoughts are anything that we can do to reduce the cost of this, because it, you know, it's an important project, and I certainly recognize that, but it benefits relatively few compared to the rest of our roads that are in such terrible condition now due to other conversations we've had, you know, about how we've not been spending enough on an annual basis to keep all of our roads in good shape. So anything we can do to make that 20 grand more palatable would be great.
Yeah, I have concerns given how we're taking such a short-term look at where we're spending money right now, and looking out 2 years instead of 5 years. And Sarah's point about this does not serve the city all that well. So we really have to work on that justification. But someone could ask the question, what's the value of this versus working on 6th Street or one of the other city, or not one of our roadways that are in not such good shape, or fixing an alley. The balance it's pretty shaky. As it's, you know, it's our tax money, and please don't take this personally, but it's our tax money going to benefit North Hudson residents. And North Hudson and the gun club have shown relatively little interest in really doing anything about it, and they're the problem. We just block the road. We could fix the problem right now.
Right.
So it's that's the thing that bothers me the most, is that we're getting so little support from the parties that are really at fault here or own the responsibility, and we're taking it on.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We need to work on the benefits to Hudson.
How many Hudson kids play ball at the Booster Club fields? How many kids are enveloped in that choking dust every time some car drives by or one truck comes by again? When you say you are benefiting relatively few Hudson residents, I think I've seen a lot of Hudson cars there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sorry, those are our kids. You know, and I live in North Hudson, but if I were a Hudson parent and I had kids playing out there, I'd be concerned, and I would consider that a benefit. And when you're looking at a $12 million building, and I know it's necessary, I've listened to this for two meetings now, and I know you've done a lot of work prior to this, that's a ton of money compared to $20,000 for something that we've been trying to work on for 5 years and which just keeps getting worse.
Yeah, I think you touch on that point directly. Is we need to examine closely the benefits and build that story better. Because right now, the story is to keep the dust down for residents of North Hudson. So we need to work on that. We need to get the boosters on our side. As we went through the negotiations on that property and their lease and their plans that the improvements they plan to make there. There's a lot of investment there, so we need to flesh that piece of that out. So it's not just for the residents of North Hudson.
I still, you know, isn't it true that most all of the dust is caused by the cars and the traffic that are going to the Rod and Gun Club?
Are you asking me, Sarah?
I'm asking Mike or you. It seems to me like I was told earlier that, you know, most of this problem is from the traffic that's going to their club.
That is true. Most of the traffic that comes through as through traffic definitely goes past the ball fields and goes past the houses there and to the gun club. The cars that do come to the ball fields have a little dust, but they're going far more slowly at that point because they're looking to turn in. The gun club is by far the biggest beneficiary of this roadway. And it's by far the biggest problem causer. And I'm not anti-gun club. Again, we've gone through this. I'm not anti-gun club, but I'm saying they have a role in this, in my opinion, and they've been happy to toss that on anybody else, including Hudson and North Hudson, to say, not our road. We don't care. We have a gentleman's agreement. We're going to use this road and we don't care how much dust we raise. And I'm sorry, that's irresponsible. If I were causing a problem, a health problem on my property to my neighbors, I'd be compelled to clean that up. I'd be compelled to deal with it. And again, I'm sorry, I know this is your road, but I know the gun club is the one using it. It's a health issue. It's gone past inconvenience, you guys. We can't have our windows open. We can't sit outside at night without choking. I mean, I'm looking at $20,000 and thinking that's a lot of money for an individual. And I realize that you guys are great stewards of the taxpayers' money. I realize that. It's evident in how you're approaching this whole thing, all of the things I've heard you discuss. But this is an immediate need for, as projects go, a relatively small amount of money. And to put it off again and say, this is other people's trouble too. You're right, it is. Other people are benefiting from it. The gun club mostly, the boosters certainly. And I know you guys are between a rock and a hard spot many, many times in a year. But this has been a problem for years and years. And to finally get a hearing and to watch it look like it's slipping away again is just heartbreaking to me, because I can't sit outside. And I don't see how those kids sit outside. They're closer to the road than I am. I don't know how they do it, and I don't know how anybody justifies it being okay. There are paved roads in the city of Hudson that have far less traffic than this on a weekly basis, and they're paved and maintained. And I realize some of them are in rough shape, but there's a lot less traffic on some city roads than is on this particular city road. And I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is.
No, I think all of us are hearing you. I think we're hearing you. We're just trying to figure out, like, what is the best way to get a permanent solution to this. So I appreciate your input. Mike, what I was going to ask is, has either Aaron or the mayor talked to North Hudson, the city, about this issue at all? Do you know anything about that? Or
No, only I have reached out to the village in North Hudson through their public works director. It hasn't gone any further than that.
Because Jim, last meeting you were talking about somebody from a higher level maybe having that conversation, right?
Yes, yeah. I think we need to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it's challenging right now between the city and the village, right, for other reasons. And you know, the other thing that I want to throw out there too is, you know, we could possibly do this in-house. Our compactor isn't big enough. We would have to rent one for a few days, but I mean, that's another option too, where we could do some cost saving measures and you know, we could haul the millings in. We have two tandem axle trucks. It would just take a little longer. You know, we have the motor graders to spread the material, and that would just be renting a compactor or, you know, a drum roller to compact it. So that's another option too, where we could probably reduce. I didn't figure out the cost on that. It just kind of came to me here. But that's something that I could look into as well.
I think if there was a way to bring the cost down, like you're saying, Mike, and put it in conjunction with another project like Dean was talking about, and then I think if we get them, I think we should ask the mayor or the city administrator to reach out to the gun club or North Hudson and just say, could you make a contribution to this, because we're trying to help you out. I think if we could put together some kind of a piece like that, I don't think it's easy, but I think it's worth asking. But I think it has to happen at a higher level. And if we're bringing it down and it's reasonable and it's a permanent solution, the thing is, it is our road, it is our property. So I don't want to just ignore it, even though you're saying, hey, it benefits the people of North Hudson. Yeah, but we're also, that's our land there. So we are responsible for doing something as well. So it's a mixed bag, I think. But I think the key is getting the cost down. And I would like to ask the mayor or the city administrator or both to reach out to North Hudson and to the gun club and say, can you get on board with this? Can you make any kind of contribution? I think that's reasonable, and I think it would help us move forward.
Okay.
That's a good approach. I think we also need to talk to the boosters and, you know, get a sense of how that would benefit them. You know, what their response would be. We need to look at this Highway 35 piece and see, you know, can we dollarize that? And then, Mike, you just come up with you know, I'm now seeing this thing as being under $10,000 in terms of cost. You know?
Yeah.
So that's a much more palatable number. And
right.
But I think we need to contact North Hudson and say, look, you know, there's a gentleman's agreement that they can use this road. Come on. You know, that doesn't work for me anymore. And I think would be appropriate to ask them to pony up something here. Well, there's a tremendous, they have a long stretch of road in their area. That's a half mile?
The gun club portion of that road is much longer than the city-owned road.
Yeah.
That goes from the gate to the clubhouse. It's probably almost twice as long.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I went up there, I had to drive that just to see. I said, oh my gosh, look at that. You know, that's a long stretch there. So you're still going to have some issue there from that, but I would like us to clean up our piece of it. And we need to definitely focus on making that, working with the boosters, given their plans to expand and improve that area. And they've got some nice things they're going to do. We need to work with them and get them on board with this, and then do the other things. But what's probably going to happen is, I hate to do this. Gosh, I hate to think about, let's bring it to the council for review, because it's such a strange project.
It is.
But maybe we need to talk to Aaron and the mayor informally and ask them how they think we should approach this. We need to bring it to council and force it to a head.
I would bring it to the mayor and Aaron separately first and try to work something out before we go to full council.
Yep. I would too. I agree with that.
Okay.
We don't need that. We have enough real issues.
No. So, all right. Sounds good. Yeah. Sounds good.
Other issues. This is a real issue. I apologize for that. This is a real issue, but okay. So Mike, do you have enough?
Yeah, I have enough feedback on that. I don't think we need any formal action. I have kind of a charge from the committee on what to do next steps. We'll go from there, but I think there's a reasonable solution to this if we try to bring it in-house. And like I said, if we can get Millings at a fairly reduced rate from a different project, I mean, that would just be icing on the cake. And I mean, we can really reduce the costs, I believe. So
Great.
sounds good.
Still moving ahead.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next item, discussion and possible action on the retaining wall policy.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So a little background on this. The City of Hudson currently does not have a retaining wall policy that's applicable to anything, essentially. It's been kind of just, in the past, people throw up retaining walls, and there aren't really a lot of standards that we adhere to, both along our city property and private property and all that kind of stuff. And the reason for now being the time to address that is that the upcoming reconstruction project on Highway 35, there's a lot of old retaining walls along that project that need to be addressed, that I feel anyway, and I think a lot of staff feels need to be addressed during or before. That's probably not able to be before, but during the project. I know WISDOT staff has identified some concerns with retaining walls not surviving the project, and that's obviously not a good thing either. So we need to get our ducks in a row to get some of these walls replaced right or as soon as possible. So the first step would be to get a policy in place as to identifying who's responsible for maintaining and rebuilding walls and the costs associated with that, and what standards we're holding people to, and what the process is for retaining walls moving forward. So I had reached out to all of you kind of in between meetings and got a lot of feedback, and I appreciate that. I also reached out to David Gray, our building inspector. He gave me a lot of good feedback, and so that's kind of how this came to be here as it stands right now. So I'll just run through hopefully quickly what the draft is right now, and at the end I'd like to get any feedback on the draft policy, particularly the questions that I had listed in the issue sheet, which were the cost share responsibility, the permitting process, and anything else that needs to be defined or clarified, so that anybody who's reading this can understand clearly what they're responsible for. So moving forward, I would recommend that whatever we discuss tonight, we would amend the draft and then send it to the city attorney for review before bringing this back at the December meeting, and then eventually to city council in time to make some action on it for the Highway 35 project. So so just running through talking about kind of the purpose of it is just kind of clarify, who's responsible for what and what the process is to get retaining walls built correctly and that will withstand the test of time. So I had a comment from Councilwoman Atkins-Hoggett about putting a summary kind of at the beginning, kind of summarizing who's responsible for what and what types of walls are allowed in certain situations, and I put that in section 3 there. So up front, that helps kind of clarify things. Defined what we're talking about in the definition section for various things. So hopefully that makes sense. Section 5, the standards for new construction or replacement of retaining walls. It's kind of saying that we're not going to allow just any old thing to be thrown up as a retaining wall. It has to meet certain requirements, and different types of retaining walls have different factors that are more important depending on the retaining wall type, such as like if you have a stone or boulder retaining wall, you have to grout the voids so that the dirt doesn't come through over time. Retaining walls that are over a certain height need to have fall protection so that people don't fall off the retaining wall and then sue the city for whatever reason. And there's also, I think, an ADA component in that too with the fall protection. that there need to be plans and specifications followed for the construction of these things. So if an engineer for a certain size retaining wall would have to put together a plan, and then the contractor would have to follow that plan to make sure it's done correctly. Part of the reason why we want to make sure that retaining walls, even on private property, are constructed correctly is that retaining walls are kind of unique in that they are a high cost item, and then they're a high safety problem if they are not, if they're falling apart. You know, it can be, you don't know when a retaining wall is going to go, essentially. So if it's not in good shape, it can be 5 minutes or it can be 5 years before the retaining wall falls over. And we don't want, obviously, in the case that it's 5 minutes, that anybody's going to be hurt or something or have property damage because the retaining wall is not kept up correctly. So we did want to require a permit just to make sure that that these retaining walls are designed correctly as to this policy that we're putting forward here. Kind of goes through the who's receiving this information, what we're going to do about it when we get that permit, and then when the permit's issued. So essentially, construction of the retaining wall can't begin until permit's issued. Makes sense. Yeah. So and then it kind of gets into what types of retaining walls are allowed in different situations. If you're on private property, there's more leeway. If you're fronting city right of way, it's a little bit more strict, because we don't want just any old type of wall, because we want it to last for a number of years before being replaced, and certain types of walls require more maintenance than others. So we wanted to kind of restrict the amount of types of walls along city property so that we didn't have potential safety issues in the future, having to deal with those as much as possible. Maintenance of existing retaining walls, just essentially, you know, that who's maintaining these walls, and that they have to be maintained at a certain condition to make sure that they stay in shape, they're holding up what they need to hold up. Standards for requiring replacement or maintenance of retaining wall. I put together some standards as to when do retaining walls need to be replaced, like immediately, when do they need to be replaced, you know, with an adjacent project, that kind of thing. So there's certain requirements. If your retaining wall is leaning over the sidewalk, that's a problem, because you never know when that retaining wall is going to go at that point, and it's not holding the load back as it should be. And we wanted to require some sort of trigger as to when retaining walls would need to be replaced during adjacent street reconstruction project, because really that's the time to be replacing these walls, is when you've got a project next to it that's going to take advantage of the cost savings of having a contractor already there, and you've already got the holes dug in the ground for your utilities and your sidewalk replacement, all that kind of stuff. So it makes a lot more sense to replace those retaining walls at that point in time if they need to be. So cost and assessment policies for those retaining walls. So this is kind of the biggest kind of question mark in my mind, and it's subject to a lot of debate, and a lot of cities do it differently. So there's no one good answer, I guess, to this question, but here's the one we came up with for now. That new construction of retaining walls, due to, you know, we have a street reconstruction project, or we're building a sidewalk or something along our street, and we change the elevation or cross section of our street, then it would be our cost to build that wall. If a private property wanted to get rid of the big hill in their front yard, and so they wanted to build a retaining wall to hold up their property so they have more usable yard, it would be 100% cost to that property making that change. Reconstruction of an existing wall within the private property would be 100% cost to the private property owner, obviously. If if there's a retaining wall fronting city right of way or city property, we wanted to, this is kind of, I guess, the biggest question is, it seems to make sense that the property being held up by the wall is receiving the most benefit by the wall, because usually this ends up being the private property to make a more usable yard or even hold up a house sometimes. And the downstream of the wall usually gets the short end of the stick, because if the wall starts failing, it's going to be mostly the people on the downside of the wall that's going to suffer the consequences of chunks falling off the wall onto the sidewalk, or their property is less usable because the wall is falling apart, kind of thing. Reconstruction, obviously, of a wall fully within city property would be city cost. I also want to give people incentive to, if there's like a shorter retaining wall that's really not necessarily needed, because say it's only 2-3 feet tall, and these people have got plenty of yard to be able to regrade to still have a usable space, but I wanted to incentivize people to get rid of retaining walls as much as possible. So that's what so if somebody decided to remove their retaining wall and regrade the earth behind the old wall, we would do a 50-50 city property owner cost where that wall is fronting our city right of way. And then maintenance essentially would be, again, whoever's property is being held up generally would be the one responsible for maintenance of the walls. Yeah, let me see here.
So, Dean, while you collect your thoughts, I know, any decisions that we make tonight on this, Dean already said that this will go in front of Kathy Monkitrick, the city attorney. Retaining walls have become more and more of a hot topic within communities, because a lot of them that were installed 30, 40, 50 years ago are beginning to fail. And I know that there's some various litigation out there against other municipalities on, fronting city property, so on and so forth, that our attorney will definitely have to review and make sure that this, aligns with what the law says. So she'll have a vital role in this policy moving forward, because I assume that we're going to want to include this in our specifications, plans and specifications book. So it's going to be something that we're going to be able to enforce into the future. And we just want to make sure that we have it right. So I just want you all to be aware of that she's going to have a very pertinent role in this.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So enforcement of wall policies, we don't want the city to become the enforcement Nazi for retaining walls, but there are certain situations that we feel it would be beneficial for the city to be involved in. So obviously any retaining walls that are fronting our property or within our property, we would want to be inspecting to make sure that they're staying up and in good condition. And then I wanted to give, we're not going to intervene in disputes between private properties, except in an advisory role. In case if somebody is asking a question, is this retaining wall, going to tip over tomorrow, or, something like that, we can say, well, it's not really our deal to say, but I can give you some pointers as to, things to look for to make sure that you're keeping your wall up in good shape, that kind of thing, to be a good neighbor, but also not get into,
neighborly disputes. Yes. Yes. We try to avoid those.
Yeah. And then, any retaining walls that are an imminent safety hazard, we want to make sure that there's a mechanism to those being replaced ASAP because of safety issues. Private, if a property owner is responsible for the cost of replacement or maintenance of a wall, and they don't have the ability to hire somebody to do it for themselves, and we have another project going on that has retaining walls on it or something, they can work with us to get that project done. Obviously assessments would apply and all that good stuff. So, and then the last section would just be miscellaneous requirements, just making sure the property owners are considering removing retaining walls if they can, maintaining retaining walls in the best condition is the cheapest route possible. So, or having no retaining wall there is actually the cheapest possible, but we want to make sure that people are keeping them in good condition. Occasionally we have retaining walls that are on private property by easement, and we want the easement to dictate what the maintenance or reconstruction cost would be. And then, you know, if we're responsible for the cost of a new construction or reconstruction of a retaining wall, we're going to want to select the lowest cost wall that'll still function for the duty it's going to have. And if an adjacent property owner wants to upgrade the wall to something else because they think it'll look better at their house or something like that, they can pay the additional cost to do so. And then, well, if there's any material or debris from retaining wall that falls onto city property, the maintenance party is responsible for getting rid of that. So, yeah, that was a quick run through of everything. I obviously didn't want to read through the whole thing because we'd be here all night, but just wanted to get everybody's thoughts. I know I've gotten a lot of thoughts already, and Councilman Weber gave me one thing before our meeting started, that we should add a minimum distance between a sidewalk and trail and a retaining wall, just to make sure that if you got a sidewalk right up next to a retaining wall, you effectively have a narrower sidewalk, because nobody's going to walk essentially right next to a retaining wall without scraping up their arms or something while they're walking by, or bikers hitting handlebars on the retaining wall. That doesn't really work very well. So we'll add that in there with the next round. So I got that one. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions, concerns? Yeah.
As I was thinking about some of the walls along certain streets, and my belief is they were probably private walls that were put in, but they're on city property because they're right up against the sidewalk. And does that make us responsible for the replacement then?
That's one reason why I put in there that walls that are fronting city property, so essentially running along the property line, usually it's going to be whoever's on top of it. So there's a lot of places where it's a private property that would be then responsible for that. There's a few places in town, I know, like 11th Street, there's a couple of them. There's other places in town that the retaining wall is actually holding up our street, and so obviously we would be responsible for that because we're holding up our street with it. And I believe I have in here somewhere that when a retaining wall is reconstructed, it needs to be on the private property, or the private property side rather than on city property. So the wall itself would be outside of our right of way, so that we could effectively use all of our right of way for the things that we need it for.
So Dean, can I ask a question about First Street? Because I'm very familiar with the retaining walls on the, I guess it would be the eastern side of First Street. There's a lot of retaining walls. So I know that most of those are right up against the sidewalk. So just so I'm clear in my head, so that wall, they're right up against the sidewalk. We know it. They're on city property. Pretty much, I think all of those. So if one of those fails, what's going to happen?
You're talking about if we would need to reconstruct one of them, what would happen with it then?
Well, yeah, because I mean, so I know most of those walls are fully and squarely on city property, but a lot of them are failing. So does that mean, like, which category does that fall into, to who pays for deconstruction and possible a new one?
That would fall into walls that are fronting city property. So that would be, and generally I think those houses are up higher, right, than the city street. Yep. So it would be the property owner of those houses that would be responsible for the costs associated with that. And then if we needed to reconstruct those walls, we push them back so that they're not on city right of way anymore, so that they would be fully within private property at that point.
Another one of my questions was the top bullet under 8, new construction of retaining walls due to changes in the elevation or cross section in the city's fronting street, alley, or other property, 100% city cost. I'm concerned about the I-35 project because that is not our project and not our street, but we are changing the elevation of that street. So are we gonna have some people saying, you know, with those, in particular, I'm concerned about what goes under the railroad bridge.
Yeah.
You know, that stretch, people will be, you know, knowing we have a new policy and looking at the change of elevation and wondering why the city isn't going to be paying to fix whatever might be happening to those retaining walls, either due to the construction or just as a result of old age.
Sure. No, that's a great question, Sarah. And that's kind of, those retaining walls in particular are something I had to kind of scratch my head for a while to think about how to deal with them, because you know, they're big walls, they're not in great shape, and that kind of thing. So there's a few things I guess I'd say. First of all, the right-of-way is technically ours because it's a connecting highway, and it's technically a city street first and foremost, so it would qualify as our street rather than state highway. At least as I understand legally what a connecting highway is. And secondly, the state's project, they are changing the elevation of the street itself, but they aren't changing the elevation of the sidewalks necessarily through the project. In fact, in their project, they had just essentially like the sidewalks being replaced in spot places rather than the entire sidewalk, and we're looking to upgrade that to be the entire sidewalk. But we would probably want to keep the sidewalk kind of as the elevation that's at today, so that we wouldn't be responsible for, you know, if we lowered the sidewalk a foot, then, you know, we'd have to somehow figure out a way to add a foot under a retaining wall, and then that would be our cost. And so we're kind of trying to avoid doing that. No, poor girl, I'm on a meeting right now. Sorry. Sorry. 4-year-old's interrupting my meeting here. Or you need to go downstairs.
That's awesome.
Introduce her. Come on.
I know the feeling, Dean.
Right. The joys of working from home.
Thank you. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, there's a few things there. So with the railroad walls in particular, there's a section in the requiring reconstruction of retaining wall during adjacent street project that has exceptions in there. I tried to word that so that we could make exceptions if we needed to, or if there was in the best interest of the city. So that would give, you know, if there are certain things like we could, you know, patch together the wall to take care of the imminent problems, and then reconstruct the wall within a certain period of time. That's kind of why I added that paragraph in there, to give a little bit more wiggle room for our situation and for another person's situation if it came to it. So it may not be the best or the exact wording that it's going to end up being, but that was my intention behind that. It would be 7C, the second paragraph in there. So
I'm going to get back to Sarah's example, and it's very similar to what I had in mind, is that there are these walls that are actually on city property, and by the definition that I read, we own that responsibility. So that's those walls on First Street that you're talking about, and the walls on Vine Street that I'm thinking about. I don't know, that's a bullet that we want to bite.
Yeah. Well, so staff's intention, whether this is, maybe we need to update some wording in here or not, but staff's intention is that those walls should be the responsibility of the property owners. Property is being held up by the walls. Generally, that's the property is abutting city right of way. Maybe we need to reword something to make that more clear and whatnot, but that would be
Budding.
our intention to do that. So
Yeah, it's on
Yeah.
city right away. So it's a,
Yeah, we may need to reword that. The other thing too, Dean, that we might want to add is for those situations, and there's a dispute in ownership, or just where the city right of way ends and the private property starts. Who's going to pay for a surveyor to come out and do a survey a lot? Those types of situations. I can foresee that happening, fairly regularly. We can go based upon what our records are, but a lot of times residents don't like what our records are, and then they say, well, that's your land, that's not my land. And then they say, well, you should do a survey, and well, no, it's an extra cost, right? And so maybe that should be addressed in here, possibly.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
Ownership disputes,
that's going to be big, I think.
I do too.
Good point.
because we don't want to open up the floodgates either with all of a sudden we have 20 residents when this is passed and they're contacting the city and say, I need my retaining wall replaced, and we're not able to. And I know there's other language in here that would possibly prevent that from happening. I mean, we're trying to do as minimal as possible while keeping the infrastructure safe, the pedestrians safe, and, so.
Yep.
Yeah, but we don't want to open the door to a lot of disputes either.
Right.
It's gonna be-
Sure.
As far as me, I don't have a lot of feedback. I think I've done that by email before, maybe Dean, but I think it's pretty well written. I think it's clear. I think the pay and ownership kind of stuff makes sense to me. The only thought I have, I think I might have asked this last meeting, so forgive me if I forget your answer. Where you have the criteria on section 7 for the standards for replacing, I just wanted to make sure they weren't too low in a sense, meaning
Sure.
I know there's a 2% cracking, 2 to 10% and a half inch per foot bowing, but I just want to make sure that if 2% is cracking, does that mean they have to replace the whole wall? It seems maybe like that's too low a number, but I'm not an engineer, so this is where I'm resting on your laurels, Dean.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've heard it a few times, so it's certainly not the only one who's had that same question. At the last time we talked about this, or when I sent it out before, I had the failing retaining wall had it was more stringent, I guess, and I made this kind of second section in there, and changed some of the criteria around so that the failing wall is less onerous, and then the walls requiring maintenance part is a little bit more beefy, I guess. The issue with cracking, spalling, loss of material in blocks, 2% is 1 out of 50, and even 10%, 1 out of 10, once you start getting into that point, like you can still fix that. It's still, in the fixable range, but once you kind of get beyond 1 in 10, say bricks or blocks or stones or whatever, you're starting to get to the point where by the time you've spruced up all the stuff, you've essentially halfway replaced the wall anyway, if you know what I mean. And I did walk out on 2nd Street again just to kind of take a look at some of the walls where we have sections missing, and block walls with this kind of thing, just to get in my head kind of like, what does 10% look like in real life, and that kind of thing. And it's more than you'd think, I guess, just by looking at 10%. 10% doesn't seem like a lot, but when you look at it, it's if the wall is 3 feet high, 10% would be 1 block out of 2 runs of the or 2 columns of the wall or something like that. So it can add up. So that's kind of where the 10% came from at that point in time. So yeah, so I did address that. I think in the first draft it was 2% was kind of the criteria of having a failing wall, and then I kind of backed off on that to be more in the maintenance section for especially the loss of spalling and cracking, that kind of thing with those. So
Thank you.
mm-hmm.
How is David Gray with this? I'm trying to read who's going to be responsible for enforcing this, and I assume it would end up being David's, mostly his bailiwick, or at least it's going to start there.
Well, so yeah, talking with David, he had a lot of great points and things that I wasn't thinking of, and in particular, yeah, who's responsible for inspection and that kind of thing. And he had a great point that, obviously he and Rhett, the assistant inspector, are out all the time, looking at buildings and stuff, and don't have a lot of capacity for, inspecting retaining walls, especially considering like retaining walls, when they're like, building a new retaining wall, you kind of have to have somebody there while they're doing it to make sure that they're building it correctly. Because once you start filling in the dirt again, you can't see the tiebacks back behind the wall. You can't see that they put in the drain tile correctly, or you can't see that they put in aggregate so that the water runs through the drain tile, that kind of thing. So he was concerned that he and Rhett wouldn't have the capacity to be there at the time that the walls would be being built, which is when you need the inspection. So the intention with that, with this policy how it's worded right now, is that it would be the city engineer, either me or having one of our partners at Bolton & Banker SCH to do those inspection services as needed for these retaining walls, to make sure we have somebody there at the time that it's needed, essentially, and not relying on, there to just be an opening and David or Rhett's schedule to get out there at the time that it needs to be. So that's why it's kind of worded as if the city engineer is kind of taking on most of the responsibility, mostly because that it doesn't work out as well for the building inspector to be as involved as I guess you would probably think off the top of your head. So
I'm trying to think off the top of my head, how many retaining walls I've seen being built while I've been here at the city for a couple of years, and it's got to be, I don't know, maybe 8 to a dozen a year, maybe, if that. So, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's as many as you think, but if you institute the policy where you start doing the maintenance, that type of thing, then it's going to be more.
When I look at the enforcement policy, the city of Hudson will periodically inspect. That's a strong word. Maybe might need to be replaced with may.
Yeah.
That where are you looking, Jim? Just so I make sure.
There
I
are
get that.
9 enforcement.
9.
Okay.
The very first sentence will periodically inspect.
Okay.
But that's the walls that we're partially or fully responsible for, which is still there are walls that's. I think there are quite a few walls that's up in the air as to whether we're partially responsible for. It's this private wall built on city property that Sarah's talking about, and I'm concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's several hundred feet of that.
Yeah.
Or what are we going to be inspecting, and what are we responsible for? That's going to be, I think that's the stickiest issue that I see here.
Okay.
My concern.
Yeah, that's a great question, or a great point, Jim. So I have a couple different minds about it, I guess. One would be, I think we would, at least this is just my initial thought, is that I would want us to be inspecting some of these walls, especially if we have any stake in them. Because we don't want it to get to the point that, we've got a wall tipping over and that it is a hazard to anybody who's walking by on our public facility. And the reason I put periodically in there is to make sure that I wasn't saying like we're doing it annually or biannually or whatever. It can kind of be a little bit more vague, and can probably, you know, we could focus on inspecting the walls that we know are in rough shape, kind of maybe on a more annually basis, but leave the ones that are in good shape for, you know, every 3 years, or I don't know, whatever we end up doing with it. But that was the reason why the periodically word is in there.
It almost feels like we would have to do an initial assessment of a lot of
Probably
walls.
would, yeah. Yeah.
So that might be where we'd
Similar to our sidewalk assessment that we just did, Jim. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Right. This is, well, you know, that, yeah, exactly. Same situation. Just ownership is the question.
All right.
And then I'm certain that there's some old agreements somewhere that are just lurking.
Yes, in the dungeons.
It'd be really helpful if we could find those.
Yeah, right. I just want to say, you know, I appreciate Dean taking the baton from me on this and putting in all the work and legwork and bringing this forward to us again. He put a lot of time and effort into it, clearly, with the document that you have in front of you. And, you know, we'll continue to kind of work on it here over the next 3 to 4 weeks and bring it back. I think Dean said in December we'll have Kathy review it, maybe make some of the changes we discussed tonight. But I think we're moving in the right direction. And, you know, being Hudson, being kind of the train that we're settled with, you know, that's in front of us. We have a lot of these in our community, and it's good to have something finally on paper in our plans and specifications where we can have a sense of peace that we're addressing our issues with retaining walls. So thanks, Dean.
Yeah, no problem.
And did you say that you're going to touch this thing up and then go to Catherine now?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll be making some edits based on our conversation tonight, and then bringing it to Kathy probably, I don't know, later this week or so. You know, in the next 2 weeks, probably she would look over it, and then we would have something back for, I believe, the next Public Works Committee meeting would be December 14th or so. So yeah, I know Thanksgiving's in there, so it kind of throws it off, but yeah, that's the intention, is to get this out of this committee, you know, in December, so that we can work through it at council in time to be able to do something about the Highway 35 project, you know, in the springtime, to make sure those walls get replaced that need to along that corridor. So.
Okay.
Thanks for your work on it, Dean.
Yeah, thank you.
When it goes to council, I'm sure pictures that illustrate some of the different aspects of this are going to be useful. Walls
Yeah.
need to be replaced, walls where ownership is in question. Kind of the problems that we're going to face with this.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, right?
Yes.
Discussion and possible action on the draft speed hump policy.
All right. So this speed hump policy is something that the Public Safety Committee has been interested in and kind of working through for the past, year or so. Mike had kind of did the first draft of the speed hump policy, and then when I came on last October, I kind of tweaked it, added stuff, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a combined effort as to where it's at right now.
I threw it on his desk as soon as he walked in the door. Here you go, Dean.
It's like, get this off my desk. Yeah. So a little bit of introduction to speed humps, if for the not familiar. Speed humps are different than a speed bump, and there's a little bit of a I don't know, weird nature to that. But speed humps are essentially a longer, more gradual speed bump So it's not quite as abrupt as the ones you'd find in a grocery store parking lot, or something like that. But they're intended to keep traffic moving at about a speed of say 10, 15 miles per hour, depending on how vigorously you take your speed humps as you're driving. And so it's essentially a speed humps or a ramp up, a flat part on the top and a ramp down, so that they end up being about 3 to 6 feet wide by almost the length of the road. There's ways that you can accommodate. If you have a bike lane, you cannot put the speed hump through the part of the bike lane. There's other ways you can design things for them. They're typically they're typically a color that contrasts with the pavement around it, so that if you're driving up to it, you see it coming up, so you can slow down sufficiently and not get your brains rattled around while you drive over it. We want to kind of put this policy together so that if there are situations that council wants to put in these speed humps to control speed on streets, that there's opportunities to do so, but also identify streets and situations that they're probably not a good place for, and so to kind of keep them in areas that they make the most sense, essentially. So streets that'd be eligible would be essentially city streets that are not emergency vehicle main routes. They're not routes that are under jurisdiction of, say, the county or WSDOT or the town, or something like that. We want to quantify, too, that speed humps shouldn't be put on roads that have posted speeds of like 45 miles per hour or something like that, because if you're supposed to be going 45 miles per hour and then you have to slow down to 15 miles per hour, that can be a safety problem in and of itself. And there's other different tools in the toolbox that you can use to control speeds on, say, a 45 mile per hour road than a 25 mile per hour road. Shouldn't put these near curves where you couldn't see them. Shouldn't put them on streets that are excessively steep. Shouldn't put them on roads that have really high traffic volumes, that you're gonna cause a way or a slowdown of a bunch of traffic in a queue just to go over a speed bump, that kind of thing. Like I said before, roads that have emergency vehicle access that they need to get through, such as Stage Line Road by the hospital, Carmichael Road and Cooley Road for the fire station, that kind of thing. Probably not the best place for these as a speed control item. Citizen support. This was kind of talked about at the Public Safety Committee, where we have in here right now that where they're considered a citizen request, that a petition signed by a certain amount of the properties in the impact zone of the speed humps should be needed for the city to act on their request. We would have to identify what the impact zone would be for that speed hump. Whether if it's one speed hump in the middle of a block, it'd probably be that block that would be the impact zone. Or if it's a bunch of them in a row between a certain point A to point B, it'd probably be that point A to point B. So Mike and I would make the determination of what that zone would be. Other locations to avoid. They can't put them in intersections, except if you actually rebuilt the intersection to be a tabled intersection, which I won't get into that. There's ways that would be with like a reconstruction project. It wouldn't be with a temporary installation like this. Look at driveways over manholes, gate valves, etc., where fire hydrants are present. Basically, we don't want to make the speed hump cause us problems for being able to access utilities, or we don't want to block drainage, for putting these in, that kind of thing. So have some other design factors in there. we also, wanted to identify some alternative measures. If the speed humps are not recommended, we don't just, drop it and don't do anything. If there is a legitimate speed problem, some other things that we could consider would be the police department as a speed trailer we could throw out there. You could put in a radar detector sign like there is on Vine Street by just west of Carmichael Road. Enforcement, obviously, that would be a tool in the toolbox. Restriping lane lines to reduce lane widths to cause people to slow down. So instead of a 14-foot lane, it's a 11-foot lane. That's studies have shown that would help reduce speeds on a road. Addition or removal of on-street parking, kind of depending on the situation. Usually, if you have people parked on the road, that will cause people to slow down because of the constricted nature of the road. In certain cases where you have a higher speed road, you don't want parking on the street, but in most residential cases, having on-street parking is good for slowing people down. You could look at constructing bump outs, curb extensions, other things like medians, add more bigger speed limit signage, that kind of thing. Yeah, and then the responsibility for cost of construction of speed humps. The cost would be shared by the people within the impact zone unless it's constructed in conjunction with the city project. So essentially, if it's kind of an on its own kind of thing, we would want that to be paid for by whoever is requesting it, and if they get their block to chip in on it, that would be great. Or if we get a grant or something, obviously we would definitely use that to do something like this too. But we don't have just the budget to be throwing up speed humps all over the place in general, because they're not cheap either. So
What's a ballpark cost?
I'm sorry?
What's a ballpark cost?
For kind of like the temporary ones that you can remove that they're like rubber and that kind of thing, it's about $2,000 for a speed hump, or maybe a little bit less than that. And the benefit of it is, though, if you don't break it in the process of deploying it, like you could reuse it later for something else. So it's not $2,000 for every one that you would put down. If you moved one around, you would have that. But the initial cost would be something in that ballpark. Yeah.
What does the speed hump cost though?
Oh, I'm sorry. That would be the speed hump. What were you asking before?
The cost of a speed hump.
Yeah.
Not the temporary bump.
Portable speed hump is approximately $2,000. A permanent one is what, $3,000 to $5,000, Dean? The asphalt, if you actually put a permanent one.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the situation and what materials you use and that kind of thing. Or yeah, I haven't priced one out recently, so I don't exactly know. But yeah, you're probably looking at about that $5,000 or so number.
That's what I got when I talked to other communities when I was first putting this together. It was around $5,000.
Obviously, it's much cheaper when you do it with if you're already reconstructing a street, it's essentially no more than what you would already be doing for the street. But if you're retrofitting something or whatever, then that's when the cost goes up. So,
I guess my initial thoughts when I was putting this plan together way back when is, I would lean, if a need is there, I would definitely want to lean towards more of the portable structures so that we can remove them for the winter time. Obviously plowing speed humps is difficult. Having our, and I can just envision, and I don't want to think this way, but I mean, if all of a sudden we have speed humps all over Hudson, I mean, we already have 80 miles of roads to plow, and then we're always constantly having to slow down to go over all these speed humps. It just, increases our plow times, and we already get phone calls saying we don't plow fast enough. So, it's a good tool in the toolbox. I think it's valuable in certain situations, but I would lean more towards the portables just so that we can remove them in the wintertime.
Yeah. So I guess the process is that the Public Safety Committee has forwarded us on for tonight here for your feedback. And then again, kind of like the retaining wall policy we just discussed, we would be sending a revised draft to the city attorney for review, and then sending the final draft. Actually, the Public Safety Committee wanted this to go directly to City Council after the city attorney reviewed. So that would be the course of action, would be to go to City Council after. If you guys don't have any significant concerns that we need to address, obviously if we do have significant things we still need to work out, then it would make sense to not go to City Council yet. But yeah, I guess we'll see right now. Do you have any questions or concerns or things that we need to tweak or anything like that?
I'm a little surprised at the neighborhood having to pay for these, because everything else that's on the list in terms of speed management is city cost. We're done as part of a city project, so it's I'm wrestling with whether that's correct or not.
Yeah.
We're surprised that the Public Safety Committee actually passed that.
Yeah, so it was that was a point of discussion in the Public Safety Committee, and I'm not going to go into who was saying what or whatever, but it was something that they discussed. And there's certain, like you were saying, Jim, there's certain people on the committee that we're leaning towards not making the residents pay for it, and then there's certain others that were wanting that like they wouldn't pass this out of committee if there wasn't that in there. So that was essentially why it's still in there, is that is that discussion. So
yeah, I would think a 50% share would be reasonable.
Okay,
but maybe we'll talk about that in council.
So Dean and Mike, just bear with me for a second. I want to back up to a bigger thought on this. And this is the first I've seen this speed bump policy or speed hump policy. We have not talked about this in public work. So it's been totally the public safety side. So I know they want to pass it on to council, but I'm going to ask them to take a step back, because I don't think we need a speed hump policy. What I think we need is a speed reduction policy for Hudson. So what I'm trying to say is, I find it a little strange that we're picking one of the tools out of the toolbox, to use your term, and writing a huge policy about it, when we really should be, I think we should be calling this like how to reduce, speed in Hudson. I think page 22 should be the start of the document, where it talks about all the alternatives and all the options, speed humps being one of them, and then laying out what these look like. So this document would be under the speed hump part, right? But we don't really get anything in this document that talks about, they list alternatives, but it really doesn't give us more. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd like it to be more comprehensive about reducing speed in Hudson. And we would then talk about what our priorities, law enforcement, our priorities, the radar enforcement first, our priorities, mini roundabouts or medians, or our priorities, speed humps. I think what bothers me is it feels like there's just one small piece of traffic management, and we're writing an entire policy around that, when I think we should just be thinking about traffic management. And this should be one small part of a bigger thing. So I'm not trying to discourage you or knock you off your game or public safety, but I just think the discussion is way too small right now in this document. Does that make sense at all?
Oh, that makes perfect sense. And
yeah, it does to me too.
Yeah, I will say that just within the past month, I think even at the October meeting for public safety, we did start kind of discussing, like, kind of having a toolbox for traffic safety and speed control kind of thing as well. And we didn't really talk about it in the speed hump context, but that would be definitely part of it, would be to kind of envelop the speed hump stuff into that. And we talked to, public safety was supportive of having some sort of, if it's called a complete streets policy or a, whatever you name it, but having the toolbox laid out so we can, pick and choose and, have like the pros and cons without having to explain it every single time we, have a problem. We can start at a starting point that's halfway down the road already, that kind of thing. So I would definitely be supportive of having that more comprehensive look at things. And unlike the retaining wall policy, this is something that is not time critical at this point. We wouldn't be looking to install anything or whatever until at least the springtime with this. So if we want to take a step back and get a better solution, I would certainly be on board with that. I think Mike would too. And hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth, Mike. But
and it's not that I don't appreciate the work that's, because there's a lot in this policy in terms of speed humps that looks really good. I think it's really well thought out, but I just think it's just starting at too small of a picture, if that makes sense. So, so I would say back to public safety before we go to council is let's redraft this and keep what we have right now for speed, humps. We can keep, I think, almost this whole thing, but let's just start it as how do we approach slowing down traffic? And here's option A, here's option B. And also think with Jim's question about costs, like I have no idea what these other things cost. So, but it bothered me a little bit reading this, that it almost felt like speed humps were like the priority without really saying it. And everything else falls in. If a speed hump doesn't work, you can use X, Y, or Z. But I'd rather start with, let's think these out with all the options first, because speed humps might work in certain neighborhoods and maybe in different neighborhood needs a totally different thing. And I also echo Jim's point. I think when I read it, it bothered me that the citizens have to do like pretty much all the work on this. Like they have to petition 75% of their neighborhood, apply for approval, get approval, and then they have to pay for the whole thing. And I just thought that's not serving your people. That's putting all the onus on the citizens. So I just think it has to be more inviting for the citizens. But I also think it just has to be broader. So those are my two big thoughts on the doc.
Oh, I think your points are really well taken by me. I agree. I'm not excited about making a bigger project for the city staff out of it to make it be part of a bigger document. But if we don't already have, I kind of look at it as a gift to the future people who have to, make decisions. It's really nice to have a comprehensive toolkit that explains, all of the options, and that people can pick, future leaders or future people on council or future public works people that have, clear direction of what the best option for any given street is. It's just a great idea. So I'm with you on that. Not even really sure, where'd this come from? Are we really considering putting in a bunch of speed humps? Would we have a minimum or a maximum we'd want to install because of the plowing? It just seems like it wouldn't be my first choice for how we slow traffic down.
And I get, and Jeff does too. I mean, we get a fair number of phone calls regarding traffic speeds. And I think to your point, I do wholeheartedly agree that we should have just a general traffic speed reduction plan and point out all the tools and almost like set up a priority list. Like if a resident reports, high speeds, you deploy the traffic speed trailer. If that doesn't reduce the speeds, you go to the next step and the next step, or, something like that, where it kind of lays out a plan that you kind of follow in every instance. I mean, obviously there's going to be different situations, but at least you kind of follow the same procedures instead of throwing darts, and trying to hit something that sticks, Yep.
An important piece of that is measuring the effectiveness of each method. And I don't know that we do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense to me. Dean, do you have any other questions? I think what we should do is we should probably touch base with Jeff tomorrow, or within the next couple of days, and just kind of reiterate reiterate what the committee's saying and kind of just get his initial thoughts on it and see if he has buy-in, because ultimately, this isn't just public works, it's public safety, it's the police department, enforcement, so on and so forth. So it's bigger than just us.
Yeah. And it is a growing issue in my perspective, that people pay less and less attention to speed limits.
Yeah. That's why it's hard when people come in and they request a speed limit sign. I mean, we could throw up 100 speed limit signs on a street. If they don't pay attention to it right now, what's 4 more of them gonna, accomplish? So that's challenging too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. So we'll talk to Jeff, like Mike said, and I guess, Mike or Jim, do we need a formal motion to bring this back to public safety, or
Why
to
don't
widen it out?
why don't we make a formal motion so it's not on your shoulders? So it's us pushing back to the public safety.
Well, I would motion to bring it back to public safety and the form of creating a broader policy to reduce speed in Hudson.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and second that we take this back to public safety and ask for a broader view of how we manage traffic safety, traffic speed. Am I paraphrasing that correctly, Paul?
I would use the word policy, I think, rather than view, because what we're trying to do is think what Mike was talking about, where we create the tool, we list the toolbox and we list different, priorities we have, kind of thing. But there needs to be more thought, I think, just put into it's about controlling speeds all over the city, right? So it's more comprehensive.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. That was a surprise, but I think it's an excellent choice.
If you don't mind, I think I got to duck out here to help my wife with kiddos here. So,
all right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dean.
Great work. The next item I have is approve the purchase of a 2007 trackless sidewalk tractor in the amount of $35,000.
I'll make this one short and sweet, since it's getting late. I did touch base with the finance director. She got back to me, and I was looking to use some remaining funds in the equipment CIP that we had saved on other equipment purchases due to low bids and trade-ins, so on and so forth. She did reach out to me last Friday and just informed me that we have exhausted our equipment maintenance budget in the CIP, so we don't have the necessary funds to purchase this piece of equipment. But I wanted to keep it on the agenda just to let the committee know and kind of plant the seed that this is kind of the piece of equipment that we would look towards purchasing in the future when we do start to take on more responsibility for sidewalks and trail maintenance, so on and so forth. This is kind of what we would be looking for. And so, over the next couple of years, I talked to the salesman that brought this to our attention to keep on reaching out to us when there are trade-ins like this and good values, that we would evaluate where we are financially with the CIP and make a purchase possibly in the future. So there's really no action tonight unless the committee wants to make the recommendation to use emergency funding from the council. But I don't have anything remaining in my CIP for this purchase.
A discussion point perhaps would be the removal of snow on the downtown sidewalks. Would this do a better job than the skid loaders that we use that scar the concrete? There's a number of tracks down our city sidewalks that come from using the skid loaders.
Yeah, there is. When the motor graders pull the snow back off the sidewalk in order for our staff to blow it, right? It's marring up some of the sidewalks, as you'll notice downtown. And so, there's different ways where we can use a machine like this and run it on that it's very narrow. it's only like 48 inches wide. So, I mean, if it's down, you know, a normal sidewalk is 5 feet in a residential area. So, I mean, it's narrow enough that we could run down along the curb and kind of blow that snow out of there instead of using the motor graders to pull it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's, I've got some pretty interesting pictures from last winter of my wife stepping through snow drifts when I'm parked right up against the curb and not even be able to open the car door.
Right.
That. So that's of the things we don't do well, that's one of them. And I know we don't endear ourselves to any of the shop owners either, when they might clear their sidewalk up and then we come back and pile more snow up.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the equipment to handle this very well. And as
Yeah.
we use parking meters, it'll be easier to use that piece of equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's situations where we run into snowstorms where, you know, it's back to back or it's 3 days later, and it doesn't make sense because every time we go out and we remove snow from downtown, it's about a $10,000 operation by the time we pay for all the equipment, labor. And I know there's a couple times for sure last year where I made the decision to, you know, leave the snow down there because it was going to snow in 2 days and I didn't want to have that extra cost.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
you know, it's tough. It's challenging, right?
it is.
Mike, do you know or does anyone know if there's money do we have any other funds, like Mike was saying, with emergency council funds or something? I would love to get this piece of equipment, but I don't know if that's possible right now.
Yeah, I don't. To be honest, Paul, I didn't hear a word you said because my Bluetooth speakers cut out. So,
what I was trying to say is, I think this would be a great piece of equipment for our city. So I don't know, Mike. It might be worth circling back. I don't know if you talked to finance. I just don't know with COVID too. What we have or if there was a way we could somehow get this piece of equipment, because it sounds like a good deal and good timing for us. But it sounds like your budget doesn't have, but I guess I'm trying to figure out, are there any other things we could pull from? And I don't know the city budget well enough at this point to know where that would come from.
I can reach out to her and see if there's any emergency funds available through the council contingency funds, right? Or maybe some remaining snow and ice control funds from 2019 that we can dip into to help pay for it. And it doesn't sound like there's a lot of feelers on this piece of equipment right now. So if it's still available, I would certainly look to put it on next month's agenda if it's still available with some alternative funding.
I would agree with that. I think, it's hard to pass up a deal of $35,000 for $160,000 piece of equipment.
I know, right?
It's a really great deal. And I do agree with Jim and Paul when we talk about the shape of our downtown sidewalks. Being someone that uses them nearly every day, it's rough. And we got disabled people and elderly people, and then this year now with COVID and all this, the need for curbside pickup parking. We've got some challenges and I think it would really show a lot of support to our businesses if we were able to step up our part in snow removal downtown. I think it would be great. They're having a struggle. Every single one of them is having a struggle, retail, service, and the restaurants. So I would love to see a way to buy this.
Mike, I'm wondering if maybe I don't know your schedule, if you could talk to finance or something. If there were some funds there, I'm wondering if could we just slap this on the Common Council agenda next Monday? Because I think you'd want to move quickly on this if there were some kind of funds.
Yeah, I mean, if the community feels strongly about it, you can certainly approve the purchase of this piece of equipment.
Subject to funding.
Subject to funding, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good move. And if we find out the funding isn't there, we just pull the item.
Okay.
But otherwise, we lose a month.
So do we
could use.
do we need to make a motion
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I would move to direct staff to search for a funding source and put this on the council's meeting agenda for Monday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And don't forget the brush attachment if you can find one.
Yes.
I would move to adjourn. That's our whole agenda, right? I would move to adjourn at this time.
Did anyone want to put any future agenda items on the? Otherwise, I'll second that.
Moved in second. Are there any future agenda items? I think we keep pushing stuff back to to Dean and Mike, so they'll be bringing it back to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's
Very good.
moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Good night, folks.
Thanks, Deb.